Of the 45 men who've served as United States President, all but 2 have either served a single term or served successive terms. The only presidents to win 2 non-consecutive terms were Grover Cleveland and Donald Trump. Cleveland is considered both the 22nd and 24th president. Donald Trump is the 45th president and, as of this recording, scheduled to be the 47th president as well. Both Cleveland and Trump's victories were only separated by single defeats. Cleveland won the election of 1884, but lost in 1888 and won again in 1892. Trump won in 2016, lost in 2020, and won again in 2024. The idea of non-consecutive terms seems odd because of its rarity. However, there isn't, nor has there ever been any rule against it. In fact, other presidents also tried for non-consecutive terms. Cleveland and Trump were simply the only 2 who were successful. In 1884, Cleveland ran against James G. Blaine. Cleveland won 219 electoral votes to Blaine's 182. Cleveland carried 20 states to Blaine's 18, and Cleveland won 48.8% of the popular vote to Blaine's 48.3%. In 2016, Trump ran against Hillary Clinton. Trump won 304 electoral votes to Clinton's 227. Trump carried 30 states to Clinton's 20, and Trump won 46.1% of the popular vote to Clinton's 48.2%. In 1888, Cleveland ran against Benjamin Harrison. Cleveland won 168 electoral votes to Harrison's 233. Cleveland carried 18 states to Harrison's 20, and Cleveland won 48.6% of the popular vote to Harrison's 47.8%. In 2020, Trump ran against Joe Biden. Trump won 232 electoral votes to Biden's 306. Trump carried 25 states, and Biden also carried 25. And Trump won 46.8% of the popular vote to Biden's 51.3%. In 1892, Cleveland ran against Benjamin Harrison again, and third-party candidate James B. Weaver. Cleveland won 277 electoral votes to Harrison's 145 and Weaver's 22. Cleveland carried 23 states to Harrison's 16 and Weaver's 5, and Cleveland won 45.9% of the popular vote to Harrison's 43% and Weaver's 8.6%. In 2024, Trump ran against Kamala Harris. Trump won 312 electoral votes to Harris's 226. Trump carried 31 states to Harris's 19. As of this recording, the popular vote hasn't been fully counted, but Trump is expected to win by 2 to 3 percentage points. In their first victories, Cleveland won 54% of the electoral vote, while Trump won 57%. In their defeats, Cleveland won 41% of the electoral vote, while Trump won 43%. And in their second victories, Cleveland won 62% of the electoral vote, while Trump won 58%. Cleveland's comeback in 1892 might seem inflated compared to Trump's 2024 victory, but this may be due to the 1892 election having 3 candidates running as opposed to 2. Cleveland's first victory essentially rested on winning New York. At the time, it was the state with the most electoral votes and one of only 2 states with 30 or more electoral votes. With over 1 million votes total in the state, Cleveland secured his victory by only 1,149 votes. Had he not done so, he would have lost the election. His 1888 defeat was a very different situation. He lost the electoral vote by 65 votes, and he lost New York by over 14,000 votes. Had he won in New York, he could have won his second term. However, it would have been a much tighter victory, as, unlike in 1884, he also lost Indiana, Harrison's home state. In 1892, Cleveland made massive gains. He not only won New York, but he won it by over 45,000 votes. He also won back Indiana, despite Harrison still being the Republican candidate. He also flipped 3 states that he'd never won: California, Wisconsin, and Illinois. It was the first time either of the latter 2 voted Democrat in 36 years. Other than California, he didn't win any of the western states, not the newly admitted or the previously existing ones. And he wasn't even on the ballot in some western states. However, even if Harrison had won all of these states, rather than losing 5 to Weaver, he still wouldn't have come close to beating Cleveland. In fact, even if Harrison also won New York, he still couldn't have won the general election. In his 3 elections, Cleveland was able to consistently win not only the Deep South states, but also all former Confederate states, along with the border states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and West Virginia. He also consistently won his birth state, New Jersey. He won Connecticut 3 times. However, he never won any of the 5 other New England states. He also never won Ohio, an unbreakable Republican stronghold from 1860 to 1928. However, he came closer in 1892 than almost any other Democrat during this time. While Cleveland's chances in 1884 and 1888 came down to winning or losing New York, Trump's chances in all 3 of his elections came down to winning several key swing states, specifically the Midwestern states Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. In 2016, Trump won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the first time a Republican had won them since 1988. He also won Ohio, which hadn't voted Republican since 2004. Trump won by a sizable margin in Ohio, though Michigan and Wisconsin were much closer. His electoral college victory was large enough that he could have lost Michigan and Wisconsin and still won the election. In 2020, Trump lost many of the swing states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin all voted for Biden. He did still win Ohio by a large margin. However, this time he lost Georgia, though by a very slim margin. His electoral defeat was nearly a direct mirror of his 2016 victory. In 2024, Trump won back all the states he'd lost in 2020. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin swung back to him, though the margins were still close. He won Ohio for a 3rd time, and with his best showing in the state. He won back Georgia and Arizona, winning the latter by a significant margin. For the first time, he also won Nevada. In his 3 elections, Trump consistently won most of the southern states and about half of the western and half of the Midwestern states. He never won New York, his birth state and state of residence, in 2016. However, he thrice won Florida, his state of residence, in 2020 and 2024. He never won any of the New England states, but he did consistently win 1 electoral vote from Maine. He also never won any of the West Coast states, nor Minnesota, a singular long-time Midwestern Democratic stronghold. Cleveland and Trump fared very differently in the popular vote. In all 3 of his elections, Cleveland won the popular vote, even winning the popular vote in the election which he lost. However, he never won by a large margin. Of the 9.7 million votes cast in 1884, Cleveland won by 57,000. Of the 10.9 million cast in 1888, Cleveland won by 90,000. And of the 11.7 million votes cast in 1892, Cleveland had 380,000 more than the runner-up. In Trump's first 2 elections, he lost the popular vote, even losing it in his first victory. He won it during his second victory. In all three of Trump's elections, there was a greater difference between the winner and loser of the popular vote than in Cleveland's elections. Of the 128 million votes cast in 2016, Trump lost by 2.8 million. Of the 155 million votes cast in 2020, Trump lost by 7 million. As of this recording, the exact number of votes cast in the 2024 election isn't known. There were at least 148 million votes, and it's estimated that Trump won by 2.5 million. Both Cleveland and Trump had multiple running mates. Cleveland had 3 different running mates. In 1884, he ran and won with former Indiana Governor Thomas A. Hendricks. Hendricks only served a few months of his vice presidential term before dying of long-term health issues. In 1888, Cleveland ran and lost with former Ohio Senator Allen G. Thurman. Thurman was already 74 when he ran with Cleveland. Thus, he didn't seek to be Cleveland's running mate again, though he still supported him in 1892. In 1892, Cleveland ran and won with Illinois Congressman Adlai Stevenson, who'd also served as Assistant Postmaster General during the first Cleveland administration. Trump had 2 different running mates. In 2016, he ran and won with Indiana Governor Mike Pence. In 2020, he ran and lost with Pence. Pence and Trump had a falling out, mainly due to conflicts in the aftermath of the 2020 election, such as Pence refusing to comply with Trump's desire to not validate the election results. Pence didn't endorse Trump or Harris in 2024. In 2024, Trump ran and won with Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. Both Cleveland and Trump faced multiple opponents, though Cleveland got a rematch against the opponent who defeated him, where Trump did not. Cleveland faced off against James G. Blaine and then Benjamin Harrison twice. Blaine's running mate was John A. Logan. Harrison's first running mate was Levi P. Morton. However, due to animosity between Harrison and Morton, Morton was replaced on the 1892 ticket with Whitelaw Reid. Trump faced off against Hillary Clinton, then Joe Biden, and then Kamala Harris. Clinton's running mate was Tim Kaine. Biden's running mate was Kamala Harris. For most of the 2024 election, it looked as though the election would be a rematch between Biden and Trump. However, Biden's poor debate performance in June 2024 intensified concerns about his health and age, leading to him dropping out of the race and the Democratic Party nominating Vice President Harris as their new candidate. Harris's running mate was Tim Walz. Over the course of these 3 elections, there were 6 major party tickets, with the Trump-Pence ticket being the only one to occur more than once, in 2016 and then again in 2020. While Cleveland and Trump were the only ones to win non-consecutive terms, other presidents had tried. 8th President Martin Van Buren, 13th Millard Fillmore, and 26th Theodore Roosevelt. Van Buren actually tried twice. He was originally elected in 1836, but lost his bid for a second term in 1840. He largely lost due to an economic depression that occurred under his term and a well-crafted campaign by the opposition. However, he was still one of the most influential political figures of the day. It was assumed by many that he would be the de facto Democratic candidate in 1844, and he did try for the nomination. However, his party was being torn apart by factional divisions, and Van Buren was denied the nomination. He tried again in 1848, but again failed. Thus, he ran on the Free Soil Party ticket, but he performed poorly in the general election. Fillmore had never been elected president. He only assumed the office after the death of President Zachary Taylor, and the Whig Party wasn't interested in nominating him for a full term. However, in the following election, he received the nomination of the new Know-Nothing Party. Fillmore wasn't pursuing the nomination or even the presidency, but the Know-Nothing saw the former president as their best chance at the office, and Fillmore liked the possibility of being president again. He didn't come close to winning the election, but did win a single state. Roosevelt had served one partial term and one full term as president and was still very popular. To honor the two-term tradition, he declined to seek re-election in 1908, but he was so disappointed with the direction of his successor, William Howard Taft, that he sought his party's nomination in 1912 for an unprecedented non-consecutive third presidential term. The Republicans renominated Taft, and Roosevelt ran third party. He was so popular that despite being a third-party candidate, he was generally considered to be the Democrat Woodrow Wilson's main opponent. The split between Taft and Roosevelt cost both of them the election, and Woodrow Wilson went on to win the presidency. It's generally agreed that had Taft not run, Roosevelt would have handedly won a non-consecutive third term. In contrast to Van Buren, Fillmore, and Roosevelt, both Cleveland and Trump were renominated by their parties even after their defeats. A party nominating the same candidate 3 times in a row isn't common, but it has happened on a number of occasions when the nominee was an especially influential figure. Both Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson were nominated by their parties 3 times. They lost their first elections and then went on to win the next 2. Both Jefferson and Jackson were far from ordinary party candidates. They were popular leaders in their parties. Jefferson was loved for his role in the Revolution and his ideological leadership. Jackson was not only a war hero, but his rebellious attitude and fearlessness resonated with the common people and made him a natural leader among his peers. Neither Henry Clay or William Jennings Bryan ever became president, but both were major party candidates in 3 presidential elections. Clay ran in 1824, 1832, and then a final time in 1844. Clay was the most prominent leader of the Whig Party and one of the most influential statesmen of the antebellum period. Many assumed he would one day be president. In fact, he'd even sought his party's nomination in 1840 and 1848. William Jennings Bryan exploded on the political scene towards the end of the 1800s as the young and charismatic leader of the populist Democrats. With a progressive vision of America's future and the skilled oratory to back it up, he was nominated by the Democrats in 1896 and then again in 1900, facing William McKinley twice. He declined to run in 1904, but did run again in 1908. While he lost every election, his ideology influenced the party going forward. Franklin Roosevelt was nominated by his party 4 times. He was continuously victorious and remained popular throughout his long presidency. Richard Nixon was nominated by his party 3 times. He lost in 1960, but he'd performed well, and, at only 47, was still seen as a prospective candidate. He probably could have received the Republican nomination in 1964, but he declined to seek it. He was the candidate in the 2 following elections, and he won both times. In the years between the presidencies of Richard Nixon and Donald Trump, no single candidate received the nomination of their party 3 times. Trump was the first in 52 years. The conditions for other candidates in this time frame to be nominated 3 times simply weren't there. There was an unprecedented number of 2-term presidents with Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, all of which won the presidency after their first nomination and then won a successive second term. Though Reagan and Obama may have had the passionate bases to receive their party's nominations, even after a loss, it was never necessary. The presidents in this time frame who lost their bids for second terms were Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and George Bush. All had declined to run in future elections following their losses, and likely wouldn't have had the support to win the nomination again. While not unprecedented, both Cleveland and Trump were renominated after their defeats under unique circumstances. Cleveland's victory in the election of 1884 made him the first Democrat to win the presidency since before the Civil War. However, Cleveland wasn't some charismatic leader who had taken the Democratic Party by storm. He first received national attention for his governorship in New York. which had earned him a reputation as an honest man committed to uprooting corruption. And an anti-corruption campaign seemed the only good opening for the Democrats in the Republican-dominated era. Thus, Cleveland was an ideal choice. Even by the end of his first term in 1889, Cleveland was hardly the definitive leader of his party, and when he was defeated for re-election, he was content to retire and return to his law practice. However, leading up to the 1892 election, several factors made him consider running again. The Democrats saw massive victories in the 1890 midterms. Cleveland had also become increasingly frustrated with Harrison's presidency. His greatest concern was to ensure that his rival, David Hill, didn't become the Democratic Party nominee, as he saw Hill as extremely corrupt. Cleveland faced a struggle at the 1892 Democratic National Convention as Hill's supporters tried to deny him the nomination, but he ultimately prevailed, largely by appealing to his past successes. Trump entered the 2016 Republican Party primaries with no political background beyond a short-lived presidential campaign in 2000 and talks of running in previous elections. In many ways, he had more in common with Andrew Jackson and William Jennings Bryan than with Grover Cleveland, as he took stances that were in opposition to many of his party's values and found support in unexpected constituencies. His bombastic rhetoric directed at his political rivals was polarizing. It resonated with many voters, some who wouldn't typically vote Republican, while others felt his disregard for norms made a mockery of the process and set a dangerous precedent. The polarization, however, did not stop him from receiving the nomination and going on to win his first election. By the end of his first term, he'd pushed away many traditional Republicans, but found new supporters who were committed to him. From near the moment he left the White House in 2021, he was already campaigning for his 2024 presidential run. By the time of the primaries, many considered Trump to be the Republican candidate by default, but he wouldn't go unchallenged. Others tried for the nomination, but Trump paid them little attention. He didn't even attend one of the party's 5 debates and defeated his opposition handedly in the primaries, receiving over 75% of the vote. All the while, he continued his bombastic and vigorous campaign style, and in July of 2024, he officially became the party's candidate for a third time. There are notable similarities between Cleveland and Trump. Both were New Yorkers, though their histories with the state are different. Cleveland was born in New Jersey, and at age 18, he moved to New York in search of opportunity. Once there, he established a law practice and would later be elected to several state and local offices. In each of his presidential runs, he was a resident of New York. However, after his presidency, he returned to New Jersey for the final decade of his life. Trump was born in New York, grew up in New York, and is generally considered in personality and culture to be a New Yorker. During his 2016 presidential run, he was still a resident of the state. However, for his subsequent runs, in 2020 and 2024, he was a resident of Florida. He never held a political office in either state. In regards to age, the two couldn't be more different. When Cleveland first took office, he was only 47. To this day, he still ranks as the 5th youngest president. When Trump took office, he was 70, making him the oldest incoming president at the time. At the start of Cleveland's second term, he was 55. At the start of Trump's second term, he will be 78, meaning he will once again top the list of oldest incoming presidents. Both Cleveland and Trump were distinctively older than their first ladies, Cleveland by 27 years and Trump by 24. Cleveland married Frances Folsom when he was 49 and she was 21. Trump married Melania Knobs when he was 58 and she was 34. Both had also been accused in sexual scandals during their first elections. Cleveland had been accused of fathering an illegitimate child 10 years prior, and Trump faced allegations of sexual misconduct from numerous women. As the scandals would imply, both ran in elections filled with vicious political and personal attacks. Cleveland and Trump suffered many personal attacks regarding their character, while their campaigns attacked their opponents with allegations of corruption. Cleveland and Trump differ politically. Cleveland was a Democrat and Trump a Republican, though he was formerly a Democrat. It should be noted the comparison is hardly one-to-one, as both parties have evolved in the course of over a century, not to mention that there have always been different factions within both parties. Cleveland is considered a conservative Democrat, and Trump is generally considered a populist Republican. Cleveland was strongly opposed to the populist faction of his own party, and actually supported Republican candidate William McKinley in 1896 rather than the populist Democrat William Jennings Bryan. Most apparent may be their different stances on tariffs. Cleveland was strongly opposed to them. Towards the end of his first term, he called on Congress to reduce high protective tariffs. When Democrats advised him to moderate his position, else he might hand the election over to Republicans, he refused, stating, quote, "What is the use of being elected or re-elected unless you stand for something?" One of Trump's main campaign issues has consistently been his opposition to free trade, stating it hurts Americans in favor of foreign interest. During his 2024 campaign, he emphasized his pro-tariff stance by frequently making statements such as, quote, "To me, the world's most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariffs. It's my favorite word." Both have been considered non-interventionist, at least to some extent. Following the spirit of Washington's farewell address and the Monroe Doctrine, Cleveland was committed to keeping the United States out of foreign entanglements. He is considered to be the last president before the imperial era. He advocated for self-determination abroad, with mixed results, having success in Venezuela but failing in Hawaii. With Trump's America First slogan, he has been labeled a non-interventionist or even an isolationist, depending on the perspective. He criticized NATO, claiming the U.S. bore too much of the burden, and he demanded greater contributions from other nations. However, his push for a more robust military and some of his actions in the Middle East raise questions about the accuracy of such labels. As of now, his foreign policy in his second term remains uncertain. Both Trump and Cleveland were considered outsiders to the system. Though Cleveland was a Democrat all his life, he wasn't a longtime politician. Even politically inclined Americans in the 1800s wouldn't have known Cleveland's name just 4 years prior to him taking office. At this point, 1880, the highest office he'd held was as a county sheriff. His political ascent took place between 1880 and 1884, when he was elected mayor of Buffalo, New York, governor of the state of New York, and then elected president. His quick ascent was based on his reputation for hard work, honesty, and anti-corruption, rather than any exceptional ambition or grand legislative agenda on his part. Trump was a nationally known figure decades before he was elected, but not as a political figure. He was known as a billionaire, businessman, and a celebrity, though he would make his opinions on political matters and politicians known from time to time. Trump held presidential ambitions at least as early as 2000, but only in 2016 did he make a serious run. He never held a political office prior, nor a loyalty to one party, having switched parties at numerous points. His formal entrance into politics was dramatic as he attacked Republicans and Democrats alike, openly positioning himself as an outsider not accountable to any politicians. Both Cleveland and Trump used their outsider status as a campaigning message, vowing to uproot deep-seated corruption. If you enjoyed this video, consider browsing the channel for other videos on United States presidents all the way from George Washington to modern presidents, discussing their political careers, personal lives, and places in history.